Hey everyone, welcome to the NEWChurch podcast. My name is Cal Ellerby. I am the church planting catalyst for NEWChurch, which is the arm of ACOP's church planting initiatives. And we're delighted that you're with us. Our objective here is to be able to introduce to you practitioners and educators in the areas of disciple making, multiplication, and church planting. Our goal is to equip you and encourage you to be engaged in making disciples, planting churches within your own context. So let's get started. Really pleased again to have Wes, the president of ACOP, Wes Mills, to join me again. And if you haven't listened to the first half of this, you need to, because his insights are excellent and really helpful. So what I'd like to talk about is what does it mean to make a disciple? And what does that look like in the average person's journey? Because I have repeatedly had people come to me and say, if I wanted to be used by God, what could he do with me? And I think that we have lost, in some senses, the individuality of the disciple-making movement. And we continually want to migrate back to, how do we build a bigger ship and but really it comes down to every individual being engaged in walking with somebody. So let's talk about, for a few minutes, what does it mean to be a disciple maker?
Yeah, so a few years ago, I came to the conclusion that discipleship, when I used that word, everybody had a definition of what that meant. So I tried to make a purposeful shift in my vocabulary to call it disciple making, which makes us sit up and say, okay, how is that different? So I think if we look at the word, the actual Greek word for disciple, it's more about being an apprentice than it is to being, spiritual formation. So my son's a journeyman electrician, and he went through an apprentice program, and part of that was going to a classroom setting for a part of it. But he said, Dad, we really don't learn much in the classroom. It's more the theory. We really learn the trade on the job. And so, that's given me pause ever since to say, okay, how sure, there's some classroom and there's some theory learning, but let's talk about how do we apprentice people? And I think part of our, if a pastor's never been apprenticed himself, in the sense of making disciples, then he's going to have a hard time making disciples. So I think all of us need to say, who could apprentice me if I've never been apprenticed? What could I do to become a disciple maker? So my son, who's the electrician, he actually only went to school once. He challenged all the exams along the way, because he was learning what he needed to know in the field. And I think that that's kind of a model for the future, that we're going to see more people learning in the field to be apprentice disciple makers. So, and the whole, our whole system of ecclesiology and training ministers and all of that kind of stuff is really a more modern phenomena than we care to admit. And I think if somebody has the grace to apprentice, to be a disciple maker of 10 people, you can't earn a living doing that. So you need to do it co-vocationally, and that's okay. Even the Apostle Paul did co-vocational ministry, right? He made tents so he could do his apostolic gift. And I think in the past we've sometimes said, well, you should have a trade or you should have a skill that you could fall back on in case the ministry doesn't work out. But I think the whole shift to co-vocationalism to say, the economic engine of my life is going to be over here, and I'm going to be a teacher, I'm going to be a whatever. But my calling in life is to be a disciple of Jesus and then to be a maker of disciples. So that's my vocational calling. It's not my occupation, but it's my vocational calling. And I think we need to help people shift, to that kind of mindset, because again, it's not sustainable, the model that we're currently using. So
it really is a fascinating conversation, because much of that is going to become an economic reality, right, in our day and age. And the other piece to that is recognizing and seeing that what we do vocationally is in and of itself a mission field. And to recognize that, the idea of being an influencer for the gospel and for the kingdom really is not a choice in sense of, it's a volunteer opportunity. It is the mandate that Jesus gave to us, right? It is what we are equipped to do. It's what we're called to do. And so the idea of it being every part of our life, every part of our relational network, that's just who we are. That's what we are as far as the call of God is concerned. We're establishing a new church, second church, actually. I haven't even talked to you about this, in Ottawa, with a couple of dear sisters from Africa that have a group of about 75 people. And one of their frustrations is that they have to go to work every day. And yet when you talk to them, you hear that the people that are coming into their meeting are coming as a direct result of their influence in the workplace that they're, in. Yeah. And it's quite fascinating, because it's like, wow, there's a lot of work to doing this. And yet we want to kink off the hose sometimes to what actually is going to bring life and bring engagement, because of the conflict in our mind between that, what you just described as far as co-vocational ministry is. And
I think, Cal, that, it's how we measure success, right? If we see being a full-time vocational pastor is the measure of success, then that's going to be what we're going to focus on. But if we see the measure of success being discipled people who make disciples, then that's a different measurement. So we'll measure success differently. And I understand our Canadian and our North American church culture says this is what success looks like. I think that the Holy Spirit might have another idea about what success looks like.
Yeah. There's no question that target, what is it that we are called to do? And I think that in many ways, we probably need to separate even just how we talk from church planting and disciple making.
Yeah.
Because when we talk about church planting, or even church, the ministry, we're inviting somebody into some sort of vocational lifestyle that in many ways says to the person that is not pursuing that their role and their contribution really is not as significant. And if we can somehow bring some clarity around the difference between ministry and church planting and the actual commitment to making disciples, it all of a sudden elevates the role that the average person who's a teacher, as you said, or an electrician or whatever, but they're seeing their lifestyle, their jobs as being a mission field. Right. We can see a mass growth in kingdom expression. Yep. So I just want to talk about that individual, because when we talk about disciple making, and I want to get to the multiplication piece in a minute, but the disciple making thing, we tried to differentiate between, vocational ministry and stuff, but every person has a circle of relationships.
Right.
Everybody knows somebody. Everybody, whether it be a family or so. When I think about laying foundations for a disciple making movement and the shift that is necessary to move away from the mindset that I'm called to create a gathering to I'm called to walk with my neighbor or my relative, whatever. Big shift. So it's referred to as our oikos, our
Right.
normal relational network. I know that you have some relationship with your neighbor and others. So just talk to me about that oikos and how do we encourage people to identify that as being valuable?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, you're right, Cal. We all have a circle of influence, and I just saw this today, and it said Jesus was an influencer, and his platform was truth. And I thought, isn't that interesting? Just a way to describe it in our context.
Yeah,
But
so good.
yeah, we have some our neighbors next door to us are Hindus, and we've over the past 10 or 12 years built relationships with them, and they've been in our home, we're in their home, and we chat over the fence, and just connect with them about life and about just general life. And one of the challenges is in a multicultural society is like with a Hindu family, the Hindu religion would say, we'll just add another god. I mean,
Right.
add Jesus to the collection, right? And so it's the exclusive nature of Christianity that makes it a challenge to share that. But and that that's not going to change by me sharing the four spiritual laws. It's going to change as I share my life with him, as I invite him and his wife into our life, as we invite them into our lives, and they invite us back into their lives. So, I mean, it's a longer term kind of process than maybe it would have been 20 or 30 years ago when we were all Anglo-Saxon, right? And all had a church history. We went to Sunday school or whatever. That was a different era. So this era is a lot different in terms of reaching people. So I just think we need to see who has God put in my life and where is he directing me. And I felt for a long time that Jesus is already at work in the people's lives around me.
Yes.
And I just need to get in tune with what he's doing and align myself with his priorities. So I think that makes it a whole lot a whole lot different than just me saying you need to be out witnessing, and that's different, right? And this whole idea that what was bearing witness to what Christ has done in my life has become witnessing, which is some kind of propositional truth, which there's value in, but there is a sense in which we need to say, I once was blind, but now I see.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, in my opinion, in our culture in the 21st century, that is our best apologetic, that my life has been radically changed because of my relationship with Jesus, and to live that, and to be willing to share that, to bear witness to the fact that my life has changed, as opposed to going out on the street corner and witnessing some propositional truth. Again, they shouldn't be separate things, because in the opportunity to bear witness, there is a moment in time where we do need to witness to the propositional truths of the gospel. But I think we've divorced those two things and made them separate entities.
No question. That's really good. I think we need to come back to the reality that Jesus changes lives. Mm-hmm. I always quote Alice Cooper, who said, I didn't accept Jesus, I accepted that Jesus accepted me.
Right.
And so I because of the propositional presentation of four spiritual laws or whatever, we have equated missional engagement and evangelism and disciple making and everything else with some sort of skill that I learned this model. I mean, I did evangelism explosion. I mean, I was a trained evangelism explosion. We actually did it in Edmonton. Of course, they need Jesus, but the whole packaged presentation, even in my Bible, I still have the evangelism explosion framework glued to the back cover of my Bible. And
if you were to die tonight.
Yeah, exactly. and I had a dear sister who was a raw evangelist. I had to almost tackle her at 9:00 every night because she still saw all these houses on the street that needed to get to,
Wow.
But the idea that we would do life with somebody in a culture that has lost its Christian focus and awareness. Asked a young gal in a restaurant about the cross that she was wearing. She didn't even know what the cross represented. She just liked it. Yeah. And it's this whole thing about how do we simplify and get to the place of where we just be normal people in other people's lives and ask Jesus for opportunity to tell our own love story with him. I just think that we have some work to do to redefine what does it mean to be a disciple maker.
Yeah, I agree, Kellen. I think we've systematized it, or we've programized it to an extent that it's just not real. It's just not effective. You probably heard me say this, but I think our best apologetic is, I once was blind, but now I see. And I mean, the question that people are asking today, I don't think people are asking, is Christianity true? Is there evidence for the resurrection? That's not the question on people's mind. The question is it real? Is it true? Is it making a difference in your life? Is your life transformed because of it? That's the question that people are asking, I think, today. Now, I believe there's lots of apologetic evidence for the resurrection and for all of the apologetic things. But I think the question, if you're answering the wrong question, it's going to be meaningless. So we need to be sure that we're answering the right questions, that Christianity is true because it's changed my life. And that's what's going to carry the day, I think, in the 21st century.
And the reality is that people are so inundated with information and, I think the answer for most people in most things is, whatever. There's like, okay, sure, that's good for you. Or, maybe I even believe that, but there's no real, but what they are asking for is that my life seems to have some twists and turns to it that are making me really uncomfortable. Is there hope somewhere? And if you've got hope, tell me about it. And the bottom line is that, and you said, you talk about I was blind, but now I see. That's the thing that we need to lean heavy into in terms of recognize that we are still talking about spiritual rebirth. Mm-hmm. We're talking about something that only God can do. Yeah. The reality is, though, that we need to be engaged enough to get to the point of where that rebirth can actually happen. It's not up to me, but I think that if we can see disciple making as a doing life with somebody, I think is a term you used earlier, and it's one that I use a lot, is that when we do life with somebody, we can see God do things that only God can do.
Yeah, I agree.
My next door neighbor is a Jewish guy, and I told the story, so sure somebody has heard it, but we went to their house for Shabbat and whatever, and he was asking me about some of my convictions about the role of grandfathers in people's lives, and he said to me, so what happens if you don't be an influencer in your kids' lives? I said, what do you mean what happens? Well, God has consequences, he said. There's a consequence for not doing what you're supposed to do. Long story. Anyways, I said to him, I don't think about the consequences. I think that God has a desire for my life and a blueprint for my life. Then if I will align myself with what he wants, because he loves me, it will invite his favor. Anyways, we talked about that for a bit, but he stopped, and he's a lawyer, and he looked at me and he said, I'm 68 years old. I've been a lawyer for 45 years. I've traveled the world and looked at every imaginable religion, including my own, which was Judaism. And he said, I have never heard anything like that in my life. That's the reality of the world in which we live. And if we can learn to walk with people and engage in people's journey, and let the purity of the Spirit of Jesus become evident, I think we can see transformation and see change.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I want to talk just for a few minutes about models and about what does it look like to plant churches? What does it look like to create faith communities going forward? You talked about tens, hundreds, and thousands last time we talked.
Yeah.
I want to land on the idea of the microchurch thing, not because I think it's the only model, but because I think that's something that most people that we have just been discussing could create in their own context. So just talk to me about models, what you think about different things.
Well, you know, if you were to take somebody from the first century church and drop them into a church in North America today, I think they'd be saying, "Is this what church is?" Like, I think we'd say they would see it differently. Now, there's obviously some elements that they would, hopefully, that they would see that are similar. But you know, church is always enculturated within the culture, right? You know, the gospel's unchanging. There's no compromise to that. But how it's enculturated within our culture is, you know, is different from culture to culture, and that's the beauty of the kingdom. That's the way Jesus designed it to be, so that we could, you know, reach people in different cultures. So I think that what we see in our North American context is the models that are comfortable or have been comfortable for North Americans for, you know, the past couple hundred years, right? But I think that that's, you know, what was once comfortable to people, which was once worked, is no longer working the way it did. And I just know that many of my friends and contemporaries are dissatisfied with the church because they feel it's overprogrammed, and it's not about real life. It's about this thing that they do on Sunday, but it's not really about how it's integrated into their life. So I think that there's an openness and a willingness to consider different models of churches. And you know, when I was growing up, we were at church every time the doors were open. People who are committed to the church now, they're saying 1 in 3 Sundays is regular attendance at church. That's what we're hearing from people. And, you know, part of it's our lifestyle. People are working on, you know, Sundays, and people have their kids involved in sports and all those things. And we could make all sorts of judgments about those things. But maybe Thursday night's a better night than Sunday morning for people to gather in some kind of a gathering. And I think that, you know, we've talked about small groups in the past, or we talked about, you know, care group, whatever terms we want. I think that we need to recognize that in many respects, those things are where the church life actually takes place. Sunday morning, I come, I listen, I worship with a group of people, I listen to a message, but my engagement is pretty limited when I look at the back of the head of the person in front of me. But when I come together in some kind of a smaller context, I get to know people, and they get to know me, and we get to, we get to talk about life and share our problems and pray together, right? That's the life of the church. So I think, you know, how we've defined church in North America needs to change. And I'm just finding that there's a great willingness in the average person in the pew to say, this should be different than what we've become accustomed to, because our culture's changed. The church needs to be enculturated in the changing culture that we find ourselves in.
Yeah. You know, people, and sometimes I get accused of this, is that I am just focused on microchurch thinking. And that's not true, because I do believe there's incredible value in the corporate worship experience. I think that there's a place for encouragement. The challenge I find with trying to bring some clarity around the whole thing is the actual purpose of why does a church actually exist? And it comes back to the idea that we just spent a long time talking about is making disciples. So right. I look at our existing churches as being potential hubs for serving and caring for and helping smaller expressions of real life living engagement with one another to be a shift in how we think, so that the traditional church as we understand it becomes a sender and a server for another level of personal engagement, as opposed to if we have a small group, it's all about how do we get more people into the big center. My observation with regards to the gathering in a microchurch environment is that you can be really nimble and flexible about what it is that you're going to focus on, as opposed to, okay, we got our order of service, we've been planning all week for it, we've had meetings around it, this is the songs we're going to sing, and this is the what video clip we're going to show, and the topic of the subject that we're going to preach on, and everything else. And we become so locked into it is that we actually, unless we got a decent number of people that are coming looking for that, we lose the personal engagement that. Can you just?
And you know what, Cal? I love all that stuff. I love when a service is well planned and well put together, and there's a theme, and I love that. But not many disciples are getting made in that context. Like it's a gathering point, but we need to find a place where disciples can get made, right? And so that's the challenge that I think that some of us who said, well, if you want to see microchurch, then you got to get rid of this other thing. Well, I don't think we need to, but I think we just need to recognize that they're meeting two different needs.
So, give me your opinion on the idea that if we could shift our, and I think it was Hugh Halter who said, we are the sending and the gathering
right
dynamic of kingdom life. Give me your opinion on the idea of a church being a hub that is actually focused on serving and sending, as opposed to just the gathering.
Yeah. Well, I think if you look at the way most of our church buildings are designed, they're designed for one purpose: to gather a bunch of people one day a week on Sunday, right? So in the past, that's the way we built buildings. I think there's a trend that I'm seeing, that I'm aware of. People are saying, let's make this building something that could be useful Monday to Friday for different purposes within our community, that could meet the needs of lost people that may not be looking to the church, but they may come in contact with us because we've got a food bank, or we've got a child care ministry, or we've got, whatever other number of ministries you could have. I just think we need to start thinking that, this is a poor use of resources to have this building that's only useful for one kind of gathering. So I think that idea, and then the hub, becomes a point of first contact often with the community, right? If people are in need and there's a food bank there, or if they have, after school care needs for their children, they begin to connect with the church, which is the hub. But it's all of these facilities that are serving their community. Years ago, I was in Antalya, Turkey, and there was a church there that said, "For the glory of God and for the good of Antalya." And I thought, that's the motto of the church, right? It should be for the good of Calgary and for the glory of God, for the city that I live in. And so I think we need to realize that there are needs that we can meet through the church that will bring us into contact with lost people that we might never connect with in any other way. So I think the idea of having a hub is brilliant, and I think it's a way of the future.
I think it was Werner Drost who changed the logo, at least in their conversation, from being the best church in the city to being the best church for the city. Shift away from, let's make this about us. You introduced in some ways the building focus. And the challenges that come with making that kind of a shift. I've had people say to me, building that had a nice big gymnasium and everything, you know what, we want to have a group for the church, and then a group for the potential other people. And the cost of fixing lights and walls and all that kind of stuff makes it prohibitive. We had people smoking drugs outside the building. I mean, there's a lot of different pieces in a culture that has lost its way that we're faced with. So just give again and ask him for opinion and insights on how do we walk with leaders in these places, boards, whatever, that make the shift from being safe and recognizable and comfortable to being a hub and a focus on a broken world.
Well, I think we need to have the heart of Jesus. I mean, we need to care for people and love people and want to see people come to faith in Jesus as much as he does. I think that's the desire. So it has to start with our hearts and with the shift in how we see life and ministry of Jesus. I mean, Jesus came to reach the down and outers, right? I mean, it was people who were on the wrong side of the tracks, who weren't religious, and who, the religious people thought were unimportant, but Jesus cared for them. So we need the heart of Jesus, I think, to really grip us for our communities. And it was Lauren Cunningham who said, or maybe it was, lost the name, but he said, we need to let the things that break God's heart break our hearts. And I think that's the reality. That's where it has to start, right? So if I start thinking protectionistic, that this, this is just, a place where I can kind of go to as a place where I'm clustered and where I'm safe, we've missed the point. And I think we need to realize that, church needs to be open to everybody from every level of society, and trust that as they connect with God's people and find the love of Jesus in other people, that their lives would be changed. And so, I mean, I think for years, lots of churches built buildings that, we're going to have this for our young people. We're going to keep them safe in this gymnasium. We're going to have a safe program for them. We're going to isolate them. But that's not the gospel. The gospel is to go into all the world, right? Not to condemn the world, but that the world might be saved.
It's a seismic shift, isn't it?
It is. Yeah.
I had a meeting with the City of Calgary counselor about a particular community or an area in the church, and he said to me, "These are the needs of this community: gangs, guns, and single moms." And I thought, what? That is a long way from Kansas. It's a long ways from home. And yet, here's an Indian guy, good guy, heart for his community. He's saying, how do we partner? What can we do together? And the issue in that probably is a leadership issue, right? How do we encourage our leaders to think outside of the comfort zone of what does it look like to have church?
Well, we're talking about that kind of a shift, but there's a whole shift afoot to digital church, right? And there are people who are being discipled digitally better than some places are doing it face to face. And beyond that, there's meta church where people attend as avatars. And it's way beyond my comfort zone, but that's where our world is going. And we need to realize that as our culture changes, the way that we reach that culture needs to change as well. And that doesn't mean we compromise on the gospel in any way, but it's our approach and our style that needs to change in order to be effective in the 21st century.
It's such a critical thing to recognize and to understand what is our mission. Why do we exist? And, one of the challenges is when it comes to even our traditional legacy churches is that the amount of energy and cost to keep that machine operating, almost, our busyness can justify our existence rather than having real clarity on what we're doing. Is it doing what Jesus has called us to do? And if it's not, are we willing to shift our focus? It really comes down to what are we measuring. So, Wes, just because this is my podcast, so I do want to talk about the microchurch and the digital church expressions. So we've had a house church in our home. We've been offline for a little bit now, but for some time with all of the neighbors for the most part, and some connections that we have with through whatever personal relationships.
Yeah.
And it's really fascinating to me to watch the journey of these individuals as they try to reconcile in their heart and in their mind, what does it look like to do life in a complicated world, but figure out how does God actually play a part in my journey. And when when those people come together, it's a fun dynamic because there's so much diversity in who they are, and yet there's a common element to it all, and that's being together as friends.
Mm-hmm.
I just think that one of the most underutilized evangelism tools and disciple making tools in our lives is our kitchen table. We bring these people together, and one of the guys in particular we used to take to church with us in different places, tried not to get too diverse so that he could try and find some acceptance. Mm-hmm. And he came to me one day and he said, "Would it be okay if I don't go to church with you anymore?" And I went, "Well, why?" Well, he said, "I don't mean our Thursday night church. I want to keep coming there." And he always introduced me as his pastor. And mm-hmm. But the point I guess I'm making is that everybody can do this. It does not have to be a mega church plant, which I refer to as rent a gym, a sandwich board sign, and a guy with a guitar. Mm-hmm. Not everybody can do that or even has the least bit of interest in doing it. But everybody can be involved in turning their home. I think it was Robin Waller who said, God never intended our homes to be a private refuge, but a community sanctuary, or private sanctuary, but a community refuge.
Wow, that's really good.
Yeah, his point was that our homes, even though, and I'm an introvert, so I like my space and everything else, but our homes are a simple center that we can begin to walk with people in a community setting that allows us to establish the gospel in the world in which we live.
And I think, I think in the past we've said, you got to figure out how to witness to your neighbors. And I get that. But I think we got to be friends first. And we got to show them the love of Jesus in meaningful ways. And then we'll have an opportunity to bear witness to what Jesus has done. And it's through a lived reality of our lives and lifestyle. And I just think that's got to be part of our strategy for the future. I mean, we live in a city of 1.5 million people in the greater Calgary area, and people are lonely. They don't have friends, and they're waiting for somebody who will, reach out to them and befriend them. So the world's our oyster, if you will, right? It's right there, right in front of us.
And it just really takes a simple shift in thinking about, instead of trying to get what somebody referred to as spiritual victims, I'm going to capture somebody and get them into the kingdom, but just to really take gospel representation, the life of Jesus, into a world that doesn't understand what it is. One translation of Matthew 9:36 says, the people were lonely and tired. Yeah. And I thought, if that isn't North America, that isn't the city of whichever, wherever people are living, that's exactly what it is. Jesus had compassion on them because they were lonely and they were tired.
Yeah.
And that's our world.
Yeah.
I had a meeting with a gal not too long ago about how to reach new Canadians. What do we need to do to build relationships with new Canadians? And she said, well, when she started her ministry, which is, I think, called Immigration Outreach, she said, we're thinking, we could offer ESL courses and we could offer cooking courses and all this kind of stuff. And she said she was presenting this to a lady out of Pakistan. And the lady said to her, I know how to cook and I can speak good enough English. I need friends. And I thought, wow, that is, I forget who it was, Trevor Seath. I don't know if you know Trevor or not, but he just said, loneliness is a mission field.
Yeah.
And what an opportunity there is for us. But if we can just embrace the idea that making a disciple is walking with somebody to the cross and from the cross to maturity and challenging them to do it as well, we can see significant movement.
Yeah.
Well, Wes, thanks so much. I love to talk about this stuff, and I know that you have great passion and insight on it. So thanks so much for giving me your time. And
bless you. You take care.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, you too.
Bye for now.